So, I've been doing pondering for some days now, trying to make sense of things. Anger only partly in check. Some days I can think objectively, at least I hope I do. Other days, well, not so much. And lest we make a mistake, yes, I am talking to Charlottesville and its aftermath. And to be clear, it's not just Charlottesville. Charlottesville is a, quote, prescient warning that passiveness is indefensible. Confederate monuments are powerful symbols cloaked in antebellum familial pride, honor, and heritage. Their very presence, however, conditions silence and emboldens ideologies that stain the pages of American history. End quote. First, and this bears repeating, and I have repeated it on occasion, please do not assume that I, or anyone in a similar circumstance, has no right to be upset by what has transpired. Besides being a human being, I have extended family, now past, and friends with extended family, now past, who were survivors as well as victims of the first Nazi fruitcake. So yes, I do get a wee bit upset when I see fucknuts waving the swastika, walking armed down the streets of America. I think that says enough. This is not about erasing history. This is not about rewriting history in a Orwellian kind of way. It's about one thing: hate. To say, quote, every country's history has a dark spot on it, is ignoring the obvious. We have not, as a nation, gotten past the ideology that is commemorated in those statues. We have not, quote, made strides towards becoming better, end quote. If that were the case, somebody, please tell me, why are there Nazis marching in our streets? You see, I can only assume by your, and I use that in a very broad and general sense, that by your apologia, that you agree with their ideology, and that makes you no better than them. You cannot in one breath say you stand against the Nazis of World War II, then in the next breath stand with today's Nazis. The underlying ideology is the same: the degradation and dehumanization of fellow citizens as inferior. Quote, every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. I'm pretty sure y'all can guess that's from 1984 by George Orwell. No records are being destroyed or falsified. No books are being rewritten. What is happening is people are beginning to see our history, our U.S. history, for what it truly is. Unlike you, I do not need some fucking monument to remember. I remember Vietnam. Although not related, I remember Watergate. I remember some of the race riots. Hell, I've been to Watts in L.A. I have been to 12th Street in Detroit. And I have walked through the East Side neighborhoods in Buffalo that to this day, in 2017, still bear the scars of 1967. And just an FYI, I was born and raised just outside of the city of Buffalo. While I was only 3 when RFK and Martin Luther King were assassinated, I remember the tension, even in my own lily-white home. I remember the outcry and the angst that ensued in the late 1970s when a black family had the audacity to move into my white neighborhood. A very well-educated and successful family whom I went to school with their children. If you want to talk about rewriting history, let's talk about the history of the Confederate States of America and the 7 decades of Jim Crow segregation and oppression that followed the Reconstruction era. Let's talk about how the Confederacy was established upon the premise of white supremacy, and that the South fought the Civil War to preserve its slave labor. Let's talk about how the Confederate flag was used extensively by the Ku Klux Klan as it waged a campaign of terror against African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement, and that segregationists raised it in defense of Jim Crow. As the SPLC notes, quote, "This deeply rooted but false narrative is the result of many decades of revisionism in the lore and even textbooks of the South that sought to create a more acceptable version of the region's past. The Confederate monuments and other symbols that dot the South are very much part of that effort," end quote. And it's not just the South. Second, while my heart applauds the vigilante vandalism and citizen removal of Confederate statues and other symbols, I cannot condone it. That is not how this country is supposed to work, and it makes us no better than the Nazi swine that we oppose. Yes, our system is a bit dinged up right now, and we have a prepubescent dictator in charge, and I do mean a dick, acting in any manner that resembles the current regime only feeds into their narrative, and by there I mean Bannon, who has since resigned while I was composing this, Miller, Sessions, and Gorka. Mike Pence is also included, but he has his own agenda we also need to be leery of, and I have spoken to numerous times in the past. But that's another story. With those 2 points made, I will add this. Whether you are a neo-Confederate flag-waving pussy that has to walk through the streets of America displaying your limp dick, or you are part of the white supremacy movement, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, you are now all Nazis. You believe in the inherent inferiority of minorities. The day you decided to walk side by side, you did not unite the right. You united the Reich. You cannot disown that association, no matter how hard you whine, no matter how hard you cry. Newsflash for you. I had family who fought assholes like you. And guess what? You lost then, you will lose now. Edmund Burke once said, "Whilst men are linked together, they easily and speedily communicate the alarm of any evil design. They are enabled to fathom it with common counsel and to oppose it with united strength. Whereas when they lie dispersed without concert, order, or discipline, communication is uncertain, counsel difficult, and resistance impracticable. Where men are not acquainted with each other's principles, nor experienced in each other's talents, nor at all practised in their mutual habitudes and dispositions by joint efforts in business, no personal confidence, no friendship, no common interest subsisting among them, it is evidently impossible that they can act a public part with uniformity, perseverance, or efficacy. In a connection, the most inconsiderable man, by adding to the weight of the whole, has his value and his use. Out of it, the greatest talents are wholly unserviceable to the public. No man who is not inflamed by vainglory into enthusiasm can flatter himself that his single, unsupported, desultory, unsystematic endeavors are of power to defeat the subtle designs and united cabals of ambitious citizens. When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall, one by one, in unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle." Summarized, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. And just to throw a little caveat into this mix here, I want to be clear that the U.S. as a whole is not wholly blameless for what has transpired throughout the course of history. It's not something I am ignoring, it's just something I am leaving out for the sake of brevity. Third, I have lost count of how many articles and op-ed pieces, etc., that I have read. I know it's well over 500 now, maybe closing in on 1,000. I don't know. I don't really care. My brain hurts. Through it all, I have tried, and failed miserably, to read from both sides. But the dreck that is attempting to justify last weekend's actions is just terrible. Sorry to say, there is no justification for racism. There is no justification for the subjugation of another human because of their religion or skin color, or whatever demographic you would like to choose. Quote, "We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It has been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. It has been going on for a long, long time. It has no place in America." I'm pretty sure y'all know who those words can be attributed to. So I would like you to riddle me this. How can it be that in 2017, POTUS could not, or would not, bring himself to condemn Americans who marched under the flag of the Third Reich? While President Trump has since revised his statement, it still remains. Sadly, it is now part of our history. Quote, "The world is a complicated place. There are rarely simple black and white answers to the problems that confront us, but sometimes, every once in a while, there are, and this is one such moment. If the President of the United States cannot condemn individuals who march under the flag of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, how can he possibly claim to represent America, its values, and all of its citizens? And perhaps the easiest test of his young presidency, Donald Trump has failed, and failed miserably." End quote. Make no mistake, Charlottesville had nothing to do with preserving heritage, but everything to do with hate. The rally was not about statues, and it really was not about free speech, which I will come back to. It was about one thing, and one thing only: white supremacy. This is about hate. It is about those who promote and venerate and exonerate hate, and those who fight against it. And lest you think I am against free speech, I'm all for dumbasses spouting their shit, myself included. But do not think for a minute that I, and many others, will not push back against such speech. Just like you, I can say what's on my mind. Just like you, I will say what's on my mind. What we call hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. What is not is murder, nor is punching a Nazi. I find them both abhorrent. My tolerance, though, ends when, under the guise of free speech, or preserving our heritage, armed Nazis march the streets of America. I will say again, there is no justification for dehumanizing or subjugating another human being. Quote, The Nazis, whether armed with rifles or clownishly clad in khakis, stand against our values. They stand for the propositions that some of us are less American than others by birth, and that America must be preserved to the taste of a particular narrow ethnic prejudice. Nazis attacking and threatening our fellow Americans threaten not just their immediate targets, but the foundations of everything we have built. One final point, and this is a no-brainer, but it needs to be said. Maria Chappelle Nadal, you are a disgrace. While I vehemently disagree with our current administration, and think those that have aligned themselves with the Nazi in some manner or another should be removed from office in the proper manner. Calling for the assassination of our president is beyond despicable. I really, really do not know what to say. And, folks, quit calling them alt-right and call them for what they are. Nazis. As a wee bit of an addendum, one point that I was going to stress was that Nazi ideology was not socialism. While that is my stance currently, I think it might be changing. I have discovered in the course of putting this little diatribe together, it's not as clear as I once thought, or at least it's presented in that manner. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more reading and study. But one comment that has me pondering my position, quote, slavery is the best and most common form of socialism. It's a statement attributed to George Fitzhugh, who I have never read any of his works. As I said, I'm going to have to do some more reading, but the comment also included the following. Socialism and fascism aren't total opposites, any more than Crips and Bloods or Republicans and Democrats. They are fraternal twins, two ideologies with differences at the margins, but both with a core belief in the ascendancy of the collective over the individual. To that mix, we have this statement, which appeared beforehand. Quote, yada yada yada, just because a government intervenes in the market doesn't automatically make it socialist. If that's the case, you may as well argue that every freaking monarchy and empire in history of mankind were socialist. End quote. So, I guess it's back to the books. Peace, y'all.